I'm about to ruin your favorite movie, and I'm not even sorry. Seriously.
Wakanda has the tools to liberate them all.
Black Panther is a good movie. Now actually scrap that. Black Panther is a amazing movie. It has so many iconic scenes, too many to list perhaps. But Black Panther is not a black movie. Yes, it's a movie with a black cast, but don't get it twisted. Black Panther is a mainstream movie, a Hollywood movie. But it is not, nor has it ever been, a black movie. Now I know that some people will find this observation somewhat affronting, perhaps even offensive.
You know, good and bad, teaming up and doing good.
This group of teens watched at Cinemark in Macedonia. They're from Cleveland's Boys and Girls Club.
All the women in the character, they were, to me, stronger than the men a lot of times because they didn't have no superpowers, but they fought better than anybody.
17 and inspired. Tamara Thomas saw herself tonight.
I was like, we all have a secret strength within us, and it's good to see it on the film.
And there's a way of talking about Black Panther that has become so culturally accepted that it almost feels impolite to question it. This is being compounded by the rising celebrity of one Ryan Coogler, whose recent cinematic masterpieces has catapulted him from being a pretty good black director to a legendary cultural phenomenon. This change in status has the risk of retrospectively rewriting the narrative of his earlier filmography, Black Panther included. For instance, due to the cultural significance of the now goated Sinners, an undoubtedly black movie by the way, younger critics might mistakenly reframe Black Panther as another equally great black blockbuster, a landmark, a celebration, a cinematic event that placed black faces, black style, black language and black imagery at the center of one of the biggest film franchises in the world, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And admittedly, it did do all of that, but it's still not a black movie. Now, let me explain. I mean, yes, it's beautifully cast, beautifully designed, and the performances, in particular Michael B. Jordan's Killmonger, is just chef's kiss. Coogler, in what we can now regard as typical form, captures a style, an authentic aesthetic that any non-black director would struggle to authentically reproduce. My mind is instantly cast to the iconic upside down throne room scene set to the coldest hip hop reprise of Killmonger's now iconic theme music. Ryan Coogler gives the film gravity, and the casting, like Sinners, carries the plot with soul. Wakanda as an image, as an idea, becomes an aesthetic possibility, and it's pretty convincing. I mean, I live with the memes until this day.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
To clarify what I mean by that, as an independent African historian, one of the favoured insults from trolls is to call me a Wakanda dreamer, which is actually quite funny, I'm not gonna lie. Thank you, Ryan, for that. But there is a difference between a film that utilises black actors, even utilises black culture and has a black aesthetic, and a film that is black in spirit. When it comes to black cinema, that difference is everything. And I knew this from the first time I watched Black Panther. And I actually initially hated it for this very reason. You see, Black Panther was not a black liberation story, but a spiteful reminder of black defeat. A celebration, if you will, of Western dominance, neo-colonialism, and ultimately black subjugation. It was a cruel reminder that even our very best brightest, richest, and even most powerful will never possess the tools to liberate us from our global oppression. It's a story that effectively borrows our language, our pain, our longing, and the visual vocabulary of everything that encompasses black struggle and vindictively makes it evil. And that, to me, is unforgivable. What's even worse is that it toys with the concept of our victory, teases us with it, so to speak, dangles the prospect of our shared dream of global unity and liberation like an unattainable carrot of hope, only to murder our hope in the most barbaric fashion. And then, adding insult to injury, it throws us a dog biscuit of social justice at its conclusion. A fucking community centre in Oakland. Like a monthly stimulus check instead of the well-deserved reparations. Black Panther goes out of its way to reassure its target audience, which is broadly speaking white moviegoers and pundits, that the terrifying prospect of black liberation is too dangerous to be entrusted to the people most committed to achieving it. Mirroring a familiar Western narrative, our freedom fighter is painted as a terrorist, and his enemy, the palatable, controllable, pliable and willing African stooge, is depicted as a faultless hero. And that is why, for me, the central question of this film is not whether Killmonger was too violent or too angry or too reckless. The central question is why a character whose worldview, like my own, is rooted in the liberation of black people worldwide, is framed as the moral threat, while the men and the institutions that actually abandoned those people in the first place are granted sympathy, legitimacy, redemption, and even veneration. This is why Black Panther is not a black movie. At the core of true black cinema, at least in my view, is the protection of the black worldview. Flawed or imperfect or morally upstanding, the overriding premise of black cinema is that we tell our story from our perspective, something Spike Lee has never shied away from doing. Black Panther, however, is a colonial tale, which, while delivered impeccably by a black cast, was told to protect an imperial position. If you haven't already, once you start looking at the film that way, the whole moral geometry changes. Killmonger, from a black perspective, is not the villain. He's not even a villain. He's straight up the hero. An anti-hero perhaps, but a hero nonetheless. In fact, he has one of the most admirable and legitimate arcs of any anti-hero I've ever come across. And I hated watching him get murdered, along with the hope of black liberation. Now, if you haven't guessed by now, T'Challa, and the political order of Wakanda, they, not Ulysses Claw, are the villains. And as an African, their position, their callousness, their selfishness, their nepotism, all of this is just too familiar. They are so analogous to the Kaluda class currently in Nigeria, it was almost impossible for me to root for them from the start. Now, if that's not enough to convince you, consider the opening scene and the murder of the Honourable Njobu, the king's brother, who, when stationed in the black American community in Oakland, understandably, at least for black liberationists like myself, has a coming of age experience, a pan-African awakening, so to speak, and falls in love with the global black community and seemingly also a black American woman. This act places him at the apex of the greatest leaders in world history. This moment should be celebrated, should be empowering. MLK, Nkrumah, Malcolm X, Sankara, Toure, and many more had similar pan-African experiences before their own untimely demises. Not coincidentally, many died at the hands of people whom they would also consider their brother. Marvel, seemingly unwilling to break this trend, decided his royal blood, the presence of his child, and the unselfish motive of Njobu's acts could not save him from the ultimate crime against white supremacy. the crime of remembering his global family and fighting for his blackness. He is callously disposed of with a brutality seemingly reserved for only problematic black male characters in Marvel movies. T'Chaka plays the role of the treacherous anti-black stooge desperate to preserve his own legacy a little too convincingly. That is the foundational crime of the movie. Not Killmonger's first act. His first act is to innocently watch as his father's murderer escapes in a futuristic spacecraft. T'Chaka is an irredeemable villain, a dog, a colluder, a traitor. We are supposed to respect this Wakandan king. A Wakandan king who seemingly is not quick to draw the blood of his enemies, is resolute in the disposing of his own brother for the crime of Pan-Africanism. He even abandons his own nephew in the heart of an apartheid empire to fend for himself, perhaps fearful that he had been infected by this same radicalism. This is the part that's unforgivable to me. Making an abandoned child raised lovingly with the ideals of Pan-Africanism into the villain. It's insulting as it is heartbreaking. Now, if T'Chaka was white, there would be no confusion about his malevolence because his actions deserve to be condemned, but his Africanity creates ambiguity. Killmonger, by contrast, resonates with the black struggle, the black personality, the black culture, black pain, black redemption, even black excellence. Killmonger is the only character who consistently sees blackness as global, something the Wakandans just don't care to understand. And this attitude is reflected in modern black culture wars. Everyone else in Wakanda thinks nationally, dynastically, administratively. Their obligations are bounded by territory, ritual, and stability of the throne. Wakanda is the perfect analogy for ethnocentrism and the culture war obsessed populations. Even worse, those that prefer collusion with the old colonies over cooperation with the wider black community, something we're seeing in Nigeria today. Killmonger is the only major figure in the story whose moral imagination extends outward to the black world beyond the borders of his own ethnic group. The museum scene illustrates this amazingly. It's one of the key scenes in the entire film. Killmonger walks through a Western museum, presumably in Britain. He knows more about the artifacts than the educated curator because he possesses something that can't be taught, a connection to the culture, and is something I instantly resonated with because I experience it with nearly every museum visit, minus the murder, of course. His ingeniously executed heist of the goods corrects the historical crime of theft committed by the museum, but also rejects the moral legitimacy of the institution itself. You don't feel sorry for the curator, at least I didn't. It felt like justice. Now, funny enough, this is the point in which the black and white audiences might diverge. The black moviegoers silently applaud this act. The casual moviegoing public condemn it. The audience seeking a Hollywood cinematic spectacle see him as a callous psychopath. But we, historic victims of this theft, feel a sense of satisfaction. Our hero just took back our artifacts. Even more satisfying, he has learnt the language of the enemy and the methods of someone fluent in the language of plunder, empire, and historical dispossession. He understands museums the way the colonized understand museums, not as a neutral space of preservation, but as a mausoleum of stolen memory. And crucially, the film gives him the clearest political literacy of anyone in it. Now let's move on to T'Challa, who is no T'Chaka. He is decent, courageous and sincere, but he is politically undeveloped and too weak and or unwilling to deliver any kind of meaningful change to move black people forward. He is comfortable and he has no reason to help. He admires the faultless illusion of his villainous father and is still trying to inherit his father's mythical morality. Killmonger, by contrast, knows what power is. He knows how empire works, he knows what abandonment feels like, he knows what lack is. Most importantly, he is entirely unconfused about his primary identity as a black man. And that is why I think describing Killmonger as an antagonist is a bit of an insult. He's not opposing the hero. He is the carrier of the burden of a forgotten people, the prodigal sons of Africa, if you will. His return forces Wakanda to confront the moral cost of their isolation, the cost of their rejection. The challenge scene at the Warrior Falls perfectly depicts this dynamic. On the surface, it's a ritual contest for the throne. In narrative terms though, it's much more than that. It's the moment when a disinherited black subject returns to confront an insulated African aristocracy with the consequences of its own choices. The anger that they believe they don't deserve, but they do. Killmonger does not appear as an outsider in the usual sense. He is a direct product of Wakanda's callous hypocrisy. He has royal blood, their blood, but no protection and no advocates. He has a legitimate claim but no acceptance of inheritance or his suffering. Even T'Challa can't even bring himself to apologize, begging for his cousin's forgiveness. He demands for there to be a fight. The fight itself reveals the body of Killmonger, a Wakandan body shaped by American warfare and black dispossession. His scars present him as a deformed child of America. He looks similar to his African relatives, but the scars provide a poignant and tangible differentiator, a reminder of the afflictions he has suffered under the violent American apartheid. He doesn't have the clean, untouched bosom of his cousin. His very body marks the difference between the oblivious, gormless African and the afflicted, battle-hardened African American. It's almost too perfect. This man deserved to win. He in many ways is the bastard child of African neglect, of global black suffering. A child bearing the consequences they had always assumed would have remained offshore, or at least hoped. And what is so striking about this confrontation is that the film cannot deny his claim. It can only fear what he will do with it. Killmonger deserved the throne. This should have been the true completion of his arc. This was his Aragon becoming king moment. Let's not forget the slaying of the cowardly traitor who orchestrated the unjust murder of his father. This should have been the end of the movie. It was fitting, it was satisfying, and it was right. If this was truly a black movie, this would have been the end of the film. This was a apt conclusion, satisfying. But alas, this is not a black movie, so the show must go on. Killmonger is not defeated because his diagnosis is wrong. He is defeated because his mission is intolerable to a Hollywood movie. Hollywood has a common political treatment of black liberation movements.
Yet I'm still here. No super serum, no blonde hair or blue eyes.
The only power I have is that I believe we can do better.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
The system can sometimes absorb criticism of injustice. What it cannot absorb is the transfer of real power into the hands of those who have been shaped by that injustice and are determined to overturn it. The throne room scene makes this very plain. Everything beyond this part marks the end of our black hero and the fabrication of the justification of the murder of our hero. Once Killmonger becomes king, the horror of the film is not that Wakanda suddenly becomes unjust. Wakanda was already unjust, just oblivious to their selfishness. The horror from the film's point of view is that Wakanda is now being redirected towards the rightful ruler, Wakanda's first Pan-African king. That is the unforgivable thing, not violence as such. The film has no problem with violence. What it fears is revolutionary violence aimed at restructuring the world outside of colonialism. This is why the destruction of the heart-shaped herbs is so significant. Wakanda has proved itself to be corrupt and has done nothing but abuse its advantages. His father was killed because his uncle had this advantage. What's Wakanda's answer to centuries of black suffering? Not internal insurgency or a radical transfer of material power, not a dismantling of the geopolitical order. Instead, we get outreach centres, we get knowledge sharing, we get controlled reform, we get benevolent inclusion into the global architecture, not its overthrow. In other words, the film resolves the contradiction the way liberal stories often do. It acknowledges the grievance, it even condemns the rage, and then offers a version of change that leaves the basic architecture of power intact. It is reform versus liberation. T'Challa represents the fantasy of the righteous ruler who can humanize an unjust order without fundamentally rupturing it. There's no need to change anything here, guys. Killmonger represents the conviction that an order built on black abandonment cannot be redeemed by grace or better intentions alone. There's only one way to topple white supremacy, and it's not through outreach centers. It's to employ the same tools that caused you to be in bondage against those who placed you in bondage in the first place. And if you place that conflict inside the wider history of black political thought, Killmonger starts to look much less like a Marvel villain and much more like a distorted echo of black radical traditions that have always frightened respectable power. That is where the comparisons to figures like Malcolm X and Fred Hampton become useful. Not because Killmonger maps neatly into either man, but because he belongs on the same broad narrative category in the American imagination. The black figure whose analysis of oppression is too sharp to dismiss and so must be neutralized and vilified through emphasis on militancy, danger and extremity and threat. Familiar language for any group that sees themselves at the behest of Western expansionist policies. Their temperament, their methods, their danger to stability, their distance from respectability, that has always become the story. And the same thing happens here. The question of Killmonger is central and morally opaque. How can a hidden African superpower justify its distance from black suffering worldwide? And the film never really answers that question, not on its merits anyway. It answers by making Killmonger a vessel of excess. And Hollywood has always been more comfortable pathologizing the revolutionary than structurally condemning or even scrutinizing the world that made him, the world that forced him to revolt. And that is why I think you can't call Black Panther a black film just because it's visually and culturally saturated in blackness. A genuinely black liberation film in the tradition of black political art would not merely use Killmonger to awaken T'Challa's conscience. In a black film, Killmonger's tale, Killmonger's perspective would have been central. He would have been the protagonist. A real black movie would not be so eager to restore order. At the very least, it would challenge the evils of monarchy, of bloodline, of insulated African wealth, of elite stewardship, of the politics of respectability, of what exactly the diaspora is owed by those who had the means to act and chose not to. And perhaps most importantly, it would not slay the hope of the revolution and present it as a victory over the enemy, and then hand the future back to moderate, pliable, agreeable governance. Killmonger's story is a perfect retelling of the revolutionary African, Caribbean and Black American heroes whose legacies have been vilified by the imperial machine, content on presenting them as troublesome, despotic and oftentimes evil. There was always an official narrative that tells us the radical was too dangerous, too volatile, too impatient, too disruptive. And there's always a polished establishment argument for why the order must be preserved, even if that order has spent decades abandoning its own people. So when I say that Black Panther is not, to me, a black movie, I do not mean that it has no value. I mean, far from it. I still rewatch it regularly, but I accept it for the Hollywood spectacle it is. It's a movie that promotes aristocratic nationalism, ethnocentrism, nepotism, and Western collusion. And what if the man we were taught to fear is the only one in the story who took black suffering seriously enough to risk everything to end it? That is what makes Killmonger unforgettable. That's what makes Killmonger my hero. Not just that he's charismatic, not just that he's wounded, not just that Michael B. Jordan gives him force and vulnerability. It's that he stands in the center of a massively popular film and exposes the moral cowardice of everyone around him, even the people the movie wants us to leave with. And that, to me, is why I will never view him as the villain, even in his various cameos. All hail King Killmonger. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that. I was trying something a little new here, and I think if this video is successful, I might make a little bit of a series out of it. So this one is called the one about Killmonger. But either which way, I hope that you've enjoyed it. Please make sure that you're subscribed if you're not already subscribed, and bear in mind that this channel only survives through the generosity of people who like the content. So if you do like the content, consider joining the Patreon or joining the membership. As of last time I checked, I didn't have that many members. I think I had that many members, so maybe be the first, but we'll see how it goes. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope that this video resonates or tells a story or entertains, one of the above. I appreciate your time. Much love and respect. Peace out.
If you knew what you were made of, then we would say